Months ago, I left my boyfriend for another guy. I told him that if he really loved me, he should be happy that I'm going with my soulmate. In the end, it was a mistake and this new guy was a jerk. But now that I tried to go back, he is telling me that he met someone and she is his soulmate, that I should be happy for him. Ricardo and I had a life that most people would call perfect, but I always felt like something was being suppressed beneath the surface of our domestic stability. We had been together for 3 years, and while he was kind and reliable, the predictability of our routine started to feel like a slow-motion suffocation of my spirit. I am the kind of person who needs movement, vibration, and a certain level of emotional electricity to feel truly alive in this world. Ricardo just wanted to talk about his promotion at the firm or what we were going to cook for Sunday dinner, which felt so incredibly small compared to the vastness of the universe. I knew I needed something to wake me up, so I decided to attend a full consciousness retreat, deep in the mountains, to realign my energy. It was there that I met Thiago, and the moment our eyes met across the meditation hall, it was like a literal explosion of cosmic recognition. Thiago didn't talk about office politics. He talked about the geometry of the soul and the way our auras were vibrating at the exact same frequency of lavender and gold. We spent the entire weekend merging our energies through deep conversation and shared silence, and it became painfully clear that he was my true soulmate. I realized that my life with Ricardo wasn't a partnership. It was a holding cell for a version of me that no longer existed. I couldn't just go back and pretend that my soul hadn't just expanded into a completely new dimension of existence. When I got home, I didn't want to hurt Ricardo, but I knew that being honest was the highest form of respect I could offer him. I sat him down in our living room, which suddenly looked so beige and lifeless, and explained that I had found my soulmate and was moving out to be with Thiago. Ricardo looked like I had physically struck him, which honestly felt a bit dramatic, considering I was offering him the truth. He started crying, asking how I could throw away 3 years for someone I met at a weekend retreat, showing just how little he understood about spiritual timing. I had to stay firm because I knew that if I wavered, I would just be enabling his dependency on a relationship that had clearly reached its expiration date. I looked him in the eyes, trying to project a sense of higher peace, and told him that if he really loved me, he should be happy for me. I explained that true love isn't about possession or holding someone back from their destiny, but about celebrating when they find their ultimate alignment. Ricardo, I said, your love is a cage if you cannot celebrate the fact that I have found my true soulmate and am finally following my light. It was a beautiful sentiment, a real lesson in empathy that I was handing him on a silver platter, but he just sat there sobbing. It was actually quite exhausting to witness someone but so resistant to such a clear moment of spiritual growth and evolution. Seeing him so broken was actually a bit of a relief in a twisted way, because it validated exactly how much shadow work he still needed to do on himself. I realized that by leaving, I was actually doing him the biggest favor of his life by forcing him out of his comfort zone. I packed my bags with a genuine smile, feeling like a teacher leaving a student who had finally been given the tools to find his own path. I told him that my departure was a gift, a catalyst for him to find his own higher purpose instead of leaning on my energy every single day. I left the keys on the table, feeling lighter than I had in years, ready to step into the sun with Thiago. Thiago and I moved into a small, airy studio immediately, because when souls are that aligned, there is no reason to wait for mundane things like getting to know each other. I spent those first few days waiting for Ricardo to send a message of gratitude, perhaps thanking me for the clarity I had forced into his life. Instead, I just got silence, which I interpreted as him retreating into a meditative state to process the massive upgrade I had just given his life. I was so proud of myself for having the courage to cause a little bit of temporary chaos to achieve a permanent spiritual breakthrough. Thiago and I spent our nights talking about our past lives together, and I felt completely vindicated in my decision to choose my own happiness over Ricardo's stagnant safety. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says, so you basically cheated on your boyfriend at a retreat, came home, told him he's a cage for being upset, and then had the audacity to call it a gift. You're not a soulmate seeker, you're just a garden variety cheater with a thesaurus. Up's reply, it's sad that you can only view deep spiritual realignment through the lens of societal labels like cheating. You are clearly vibrating at a very low frequency and cannot comprehend a love that exists outside of linear, possessive boundaries. Anonymous user 2 says, did you honestly expect a man whose heart you just ripped out to send you a thank you note for the clarity? How delusional do you have to be to think his crying was validation of his need for growth? Ops reply, I wasn't being delusional. I was being compassionate by refusing to coddle his ego. I was trying to liberate his soul from a relationship that was no longer serving his highest good, even if he was too blinded by his own drama to see it at the time. Update 1. It has been 3 months since I left Ricardo to pursue my cosmic destiny, and honestly, the universe has a very strange way of testing one's resolve. Thiago, the man I thought was my eternal flame, turned out to be a total nightmare who didn't understand the basic principles of mutual energy exchange. It turns out that his version of merging energies mostly involved him using my credit card for healing crystals and refusing to pay a single cent toward our rent. He claimed that worrying about money was a low-vibe distraction from his meditation, which apparently required him to sleep until 2 p.m. every single day. I found myself working double shifts just to afford the organic, non-GMO meals he insisted were necessary for his spiritual vessel, while he left the kitchen looking like a disaster zone. The depth I thought he had was actually just a collection of catchy phrases he had memorized from TikTok gurus to avoid having a real job. He was aggressive whenever I asked him to help with the chores, telling me that my feminine energy was becoming too piercing and was disrupting his inner peace. I eventually realized that this wasn't a human mistake I had made, but a cosmic error, a detour I had to take to appreciate what I truly had. The universe was showing me that I needed a stable anchor to balance out my high-intensity light, and that anchor had always been Ricardo. I knew I had to find a way back to him because our connection was the only thing that felt grounded in reality now that Thiago's facade had crumbled. I decided to start reaching out to Ricardo, keeping things light and spiritual so as not to overwhelm his healing process. I sent him a text saying, I hope your aura is clear today, followed by a heart emoji to show that I was still holding space for him. He didn't respond, but I didn't let that discourage me because I knew how much work he had to do to catch up to my level of awareness. A few days later, I saw a sabia bird sitting on a branch outside my window, and I immediately felt it was a sign from our shared past. I snapped a photo and sent it to him with the caption, saw this sabia and thought of our shared silence from the old days. Again, the silence from his end was deafening, but I interpreted it as him being intimidated by the raw intensity of my return to his life. I figured he was probably sitting in his apartment, looking at my messages and feeling a mix of awe and fear at the prospect of our souls remerging. It's a lot for a man like him to handle, especially after I had already ascended to such a high level of self-actualization during my time away. I began to realize that Thiago was nothing more than a karmic teacher whose only purpose was to lead me back to the one person who truly knew how to handle my complex energy. I felt a sense of peace knowing that I had finished that lesson and was ready to reclaim my rightful place by Ricardo's side. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, Asabia, are you for real right now? The man is probably just trying to figure out how to get his favorite hoodies back without having to talk to a woman who texts him about auras after dumping him. Ops reply, you clearly don't understand how the natural world communicates through signs and symbols. Nature doesn't lie, and that bird was a profound objective truth that Ricardo is simply too scared to acknowledge right now. Anonymous user 2 says, so Thiago was a karmic teacher the second he stopped being a freeloader, huh? It sounds like you just got played by a guy who knew exactly which spiritual buzzwords would get him a free room and board. Ops reply, Thiago served his purpose in my journey, and I am grateful for the shadow work he forced me to do. I have moved past that vibration now, and I refuse to let your cynical interpretation of my growth diminish the lessons I've learned. Update 2. 2 weeks have passed since my last attempt to reach him, and I decided that digital communication was simply too shallow for the level of reconciliation I was seeking. I knew that Ricardo needed to see my physical presence to understand that I had successfully integrated the lessons Thiago had inadvertently taught me. I drove over to our old apartment. Well, his apartment now. And I didn't even bother to ring the bell or knock because I wanted the meeting to be organic. I sat down on the front steps, closed my eyes, and began to manifest his arrival, trusting that he would feel my energy as he approached. I spent about 3 hours in a state of high vibrational waiting, feeling completely at peace with the universe's timing. When Ricardo finally pulled into the driveway, my heart did a little leap of joy, but then I noticed he wasn't alone in the car. A woman I didn't recognize was in the passenger seat, laughing at something he said, which I immediately recognized as a classic defense mechanism on his part. I stood up and smoothed my dress, flashing him the most gracious and forgiving smile I could muster to show I wasn't bothered by his distraction. I walked toward them as they got out of the car, ready to welcome him back into the light of our shared destiny. "Ricardo," I said softly, "I've come back. I've fully integrated everything Thiago taught me, and I'm finally ready to guide us into our next phase." He stopped dead in his tracks and looked at me with an expression that was completely blank, almost as if he were looking at a stranger. There was no anger, no resentment, and no spark of the old flame. I expected to see dancing in his eyes, just a chilling emptiness. I took a step closer, trying to reach through the fog of his ego, and told him that I knew he was just suppressed and afraid of the light I bring. I looked at the girl, a very basic-looking woman in a generic floral dress, and felt a wave of genuine pity for her. She was clearly just a band-aid for his wounded pride, a temporary fix while he tried to hide from the massive spiritual work we still had to do together. I told him quite clearly that he didn't have to be afraid anymore, and that I was here to help him transition away from this shadow version of himself. Ricardo didn't say a word to me. He just took the girl's hand and started walking toward the door as if I were a piece of furniture. I called out to him, explaining that he was only hurting himself by ignoring the call of our souls, but he didn't even look back. The girl looked over her shoulder with a confused expression, and I just gave her a knowing nod, because I knew she could never handle the complexity of his energy. It was painful to watch him retreat so deeply into his own shadows, choosing the safety of a mundane band-aid over the brilliance of a twin flame connection. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says sitting on someone's steps for 3 hours waiting for them to feel your presence isn't spiritual. It's literally stalking. You're lucky he didn't call the police on you for trespassing and harassment. Ops reply, I call it spiritual persistence, which is something people with shallow lives will never understand. The law of attraction requires one to be physically present for the manifestation to take hold in the material world. Anonymous user 2 says, I love how you call the new girl basic, just because she isn't spouting nonsense about integration and light phases. Maybe Ricardo just wants a normal person who doesn't treat his life like a social experiment. Ops replied, normal is just another word for stagnant, and Ricardo is a deeply complex man who will eventually realize that a basic connection can never satisfy a soul of his caliber. I am the only one who truly understands what lies beneath his surface. Update 3. 5 days have gone by since that awkward encounter at the apartment, and I finally managed to get Ricardo to pick up the phone after I used a friend's number to call him. I knew that if I could just get him to hear the sincerity in my voice, he would crumble and realize how much he missed our shared vibration. I opened my heart completely, pouring out all the pain I had felt with Thiago and admitting that leaving had been a mistake in the physical sense, even if it was a spiritual necessity. I waited for him to exhale, to tell me he had been waiting for this call, and to ask me to come home so we could start our ascension together. I was prepared to be magnanimous and forgive him for the Band-Aid girl, knowing she was just a symptom of his loneliness. Instead of the warm welcome I expected, Ricardo spoke with a cold, calculated precision that felt like a series of stabs to my energetic center. He didn't offer sympathy. Instead, he chose to use my own sacred words as a weapon to shut me out of his life. Beatrice, he said, and his voice was so steady it was terrifying. Do you remember what you told me the day you left? You told me that if I really loved you, I should be happy that you found your soulmate. I tried to interrupt to explain the nuance of the situation, but he just kept going, throwing my own philosophy back in my face like it was trash. He told me that he had finally understood what I meant, and that he had applied my lesson to his own life with incredible success. He said, I found my soulmate, Beatrice. Her name is Sarah, and she is my true twin flame. The person I was always meant to find after you cleared the path. He actually thanked me for the gift of my departure, claiming that if I hadn't left, he never would have found the superior love he now shares with her. He told me that according to my own ethics, I should be the happiest person in the world for him right now because he finally found his ultimate alignment. Then, without even giving me a chance to respond to his blatant distortion of my words, he told me to never call him again and blocked the number. I sat there in shock, feeling the weight of his energy abuse pressing down on me like a physical weight. It is absolutely disgusting how he took the light. I gave him the very tools of enlightenment I used to try and save him and turned them into a wall to exclude me. He is clearly using my spirituality as a shield to hide his own spite and to justify his relationship with that basic manifestation of resentment he calls Sarah. My own soulmate ethics are now being twisted to keep me away from the very person I was trying to help, and it feels like a total betrayal of everything I stand for. He thinks he's won by using my language, but he's really just showing how much he's corrupted the beautiful truth I tried to share with him. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says this is the most be careful what you wish for story I've ever heard in my life. You literally gave him the script for your own rejection, and he performed it perfectly. Absolute legend. Ops reply, you think this is a joke, but it's actually a form of deep energetic abuse to take someone's spiritual language and use it to cause them pain. Ricardo is being incredibly manipulative by refusing to acknowledge the context of my original message. Anonymous user 2 says he didn't just block you, he used your own soulmate manual to delete you from his life. It's not energy abuse, it's poetic justice, and Sarah sounds like she's exactly what he needs. OP's reply, Sarah is nothing more than a manifestation of his spite, a placeholder he's using to convince himself he's moved on. He will eventually realize that you can't build a twin flame connection on a foundation of bitterness and stolen philosophy. Update 4. It has been 4 long months since my own gift blew up in my face and the world feels increasingly hollow and disconnected from the truth. I recently discovered through a frantic hour-long deep dive into his sister's Instagram that Ricardo and Sarah are now officially engaged. It's honestly sickening to see them posing in front of a sunset, pretending to have the kind of superior love that I was the one to architect and describe. Every night at exactly 2 a.m. when the veil between worlds is the thinnest, I write out long, profound manifestos about the corruption of spiritual language and the nature of betrayal. I send them to Ricardo's number, even though I know the Visto will stay a cold, indifferent gray because I'm still blocked on every platform. I do it anyway because it's the only way to release the energy and keep myself from completely collapsing under the weight of his ungratefulness. I'm currently living in a cramped, depressing studio apartment that still reeks of the cheap synthetic incense Thiago left behind like a toxic memory. I spend most of my time staring at the walls, wondering how I became the one left behind to do all the shadow work while he lives out my projected life. He didn't just move on. He stole my entire philosophy, my vocabulary, and my vision of a higher love to build a life with someone who doesn't have a single original thought in her head. It was supposed to be me who was happy and free, the one soaring toward a brighter destiny while he learned to cope with the silence. Instead, I'm the one trapped in the silence, watching him use the very light I brought into his life to build a sun that refused to shine on me. He turned my own enlightenment into my personal prison, and the most bitter part is that he actually thinks he's the one who evolved.